DJ. We're excited to have him tonight. So our mission, Helping Parents Heal, is a nonprofit organization dedicated to assisting parents whose children have passed. Through support and resources offered, we aspire to help individuals become shining light parents, meaning a shift from a state of emotional heaviness to one of hopefulness and greater peace of mind. HPH goes a step beyond other groups by allowing the open discussion of spiritual experiences and afterlife evidence in a non-dogmatic way. HPH affiliate groups welcome everyone, regardless of religious or non-religious background, and encourage open dialogue. Attendance at this meeting is voluntary. We hope that participants will learn from and share with each other. Discussions here are confidential and not designed to replace traditional therapy or spiritual counseling. Helping Parents Heal offers a wide variety of speakers, allowing parents to learn about many possible ways to heal. This includes presenters covering progressive topics such as afterlife evidence and connecting with children who have passed. The views expressed by our guest speakers may or may not reflect the opinions of Helping Parents Heal leaders and members, so we ask that you take from their presentations whatever may benefit you personally. So welcome and thank you everybody for showing up tonight.
Thank you, Lynn. That was perfect. And I'm going to go ahead and read DJ's short bio, which is really interesting. He's an award-winning documentary filmmaker, best-selling author, and quantum economist. His films have aired on PBS, Gaia TV, the Discovery Channel, and Hallmark, as well as being featured at over 120 film festivals all around the world. In them, he has collaborated with some of the country's top philosophers, academics, activists, poets, researchers, and theologians. His first book, The Crossover Experience, which explores the phenomenon of the near-death experience, was released in 2022 and has been an Amazon bestseller. His second book, My Very Own Psychedelic Psychotherapy, is a 2023 release and chronicles his experience with psychedelics for psychospiritual healing and growth. His most recent book, released in 2024, is entitled Rumi for Kids and the Young at Heart. It was created in part as a natural complement for his film series, Poetry in Motion, an innovative collection of 21 short films. Each film artfully combines a powerful poem with music and imagery, creating a captivating experience. Among his collaborators on this project are Coleman Barks and Robert Bly, and many of the films feature the profound poetry of Rumi. DJ is a member of the Directors Guild of America and the Authors Guild of America. You can learn more about him by visiting his YouTube site, and I'm going to go ahead and put that link in the chat box. And without further ado, please join me in welcoming DJ Kadagian. Welcome, DJ. We're so happy that you've joined us this evening.
Thank you for having me. Happy to be
And
here.
go ahead, sorry.
No, I'm happy to be here. Thank you.
Well, and I'm just so thrilled to be able to be speaking to you about these three books. First of all, because obviously we're all so interested in near-death experiences. And Jeffrey Olson, as well as Anita Mirjani, wrote forewords for this book, as well as several other people who have actually spoken or will be speaking at our conference. But these near-death experiences allow us to know so much more about where our children are going and where they are now when they transition. And the fascinating thing about all of these different near-death experiences is that they have so many similarities. They also have differences. And you, being a quantum economist, kind of are able to break those down. And I would love for you to maybe explain to us how the differences allow us to know that these experiences are actually real and that they're not the dreams of a brain that is actually dying. Is there any way that you could, that might be a little bit too technical in the very beginning. First of all, before that, maybe you could tell us about the passing of your son, and if that was the inspiration for this. I think that it happened after this book was written. Is that correct?
I wrote the book, yes, after he passed. I was, excuse me, I came across the subject of the near-death experience probably 25 years ago. And I was studying the world's religions and became very interested in Buddhism as well as Christianity, Hinduism, and the like. And so I stumbled on the Tibetan Book of the Dead. And so I started researching and studying that as well. And somewhere along the way, I don't know why or how, but I came across Raymond Moody's book, Life After Life. And that really fascinated me. I mean, it was such a different concept. And I didn't know what to make of it. And it was one of those, well, this sounds a little too good to be true. And there wasn't enough research, which was my issue. And I'm, by trade a numbers person. I crunch massive amounts of numbers to generate kind of the things that I used to work within the financial markets. So at that time, I kind of kept going because I couldn't do anything with it. But it always stuck in the back of my mind. And then when my son passed, I was pretty despondent for quite a long time. And one day my wife put in front of me a workbook. And in the workbook, they talked about reincarnation, past life regression, all different subjects along kind of that thread. And one of the subjects I kind of flipped through, and it was a workbook, and it just not quite my thing, and I didn't have the headspace for it, quite frankly. And then I stumbled on a chapter that talked about the near-death experience. And so now it's 25 years later. And of course, I'm curious. I was to begin with, but then under the circumstances became even more so. And the book had a link to a website that had testimonials. And I had never seen testimonials because they really didn't have them. This is back in probably the mid 90s, I would say. So I went, found the links, and I went and watched some of these testimonials, and that's really what kind of blew my mind because I mean they were all saying the same thing essentially. I mean, slightly different shades, but essentially the story was just consistent, one after another after another. But I had read some a long time ago, but really what struck me was the people that were describing them. And what I saw was that they were completely genuine, that none of this was being made up. I mean, you could say, well, they're real or they're not real, but these people, it happened to them. You'll never convince them otherwise. And just looking in their eyes when they were speaking and listening to the inflection in their voice, I was just like, this is, I have to look at this a little more deeply. And so, I started reading all the books, and I'm, believe it or not really a book person because I have really bad dyslexia and I rarely read. So, I generally am on the documentary film side. I learned that way, and YouTube has been phenomenal for me because it's just, that's my medium. But I also then stumbled on a website, and I could give you the address to that, but it's Near Death Experience Research Foundation. And on that site, they have, I would say, 5,000 or 6,000 written testimonials that people fill out, very, detailed, comprehensive questionnaires, and then they're posted. And so it was at around that time I said, I tend to learn the most when I build something, whether it's a film or, in the markets, a program, and in this case, a book. So I decided at that point that if I was really going to get to know the subject, I would write a book on it. And so to really the foundation of it is just a massive amount of research. And so I spent months reading, thousands of these testimonials. And similar to how when I'm creating, say, a trading program for the markets, I'll just crunch numbers for months and months and months and months, and I'll start to see and feel patterns and kind of get a sense of what's going on. And that's what I did with a near-death experience. And after a while, I said, well, this is just, I mean, the statistical significance of what's happening here, I can't punch holes in it. I'm a massive skeptic at heart, and I think that's what you have to be when you're, for example, when you're managing money in the market. You really, really have to not just do your homework, but you can't really take anything for, you know, at face value. You almost have to be, you have to be kind of, I don't want to say counterintuitive, but you really have to, you have to zag when everybody's zigging. When everybody's going one way, you want to go the other. So when I hear all these things, my first instinct is, especially in this case, I can't be. But then, as I said, spending so many months going through this information, and you know, supplemented with watching the testimonials, and just so many of them are coming out now. And that was it. I just said, there's just, there's no way that I could convince myself that this wasn't real. And so I really took that deep dive and went in there. So that's, I would say it was what happened to my son that really brought me back to a subject I was interested in almost 30 years ago. And it really helped me a lot in terms of my state of mind. It really got me moving again in terms of really doing something that I was passionate about and really interested in. So, and then what I like about it at the end of the day is I have something that I can share with people and kind of give them a sense of really what I learned, and hopefully, give them the ability to kind of, you know, put the pieces together for themselves too. Not give any answers. So it's all there. It is. This is what I found. I'm not trying to convince anybody, but it's just something I think, you should wrestle with, one way or another. I think anyone should just take a look at this.
That's beautifully said. And I just want to say that I I also know that in the beginning it was very difficult for these people to be coming forward and telling about these near-death experiences, because they're just everyday people who are having a very extraordinary experience. And for instance, I've said this before, my mother-in-law was living in Kinshasa at the time, and they had been at a dinner party, and this was in 1975. And they had an accident. She went through the windshield and had 78 stitches. She went through the tunnel. She got to the other side. It was an incredible experience for her, but nobody believed her. Nobody had ever heard of anything like that. And it was not until Raymond Moody's book was published in French, which was actually that same year that it came out, and she found that book, that she realized she wasn't crazy. And so I think that nobody really wants to talk about these things. Nobody is publicizing this and jumping up on the rooftops telling people about this, because for a very long time it was something that nobody did want to talk about. When you're talking about your son, though, and how this helped you, I must say that chapter 20 was something that just really, it spoke to me so much. It's a young man who has passed in a car accident, and in his teenager voice, he's talking about what's happening on the other side. Do you remember that, DJ, at all?
There were so many.
No, but
Tell me a little bit more and I'll remember it.
well, if I could just read a little bit
Oh,
here,
sure,
I
sure.
just think that for our parents, it's something that's very relevant and also kind of fun to listen to. Um, I realized I was floating above a car wreck. I had an altered type of vision because even though I was above the car, I could see inside the car with sort of supervision. I saw my body and I saw the body of my friend at the wheel. I had no real emotion about what I was witnessing. There was a calm sense of detachment, and I remembered looking at my body as though it was a sweater or a suit I had worn and now cast off. I remembered thinking that was cool being Thomas, like it was some fun excursion, this human life. The craziest part for me was the feeling of overwhelming euphoria. I didn't feel foggy or messed up in the head. I felt extremely clear, conscious, and happy. I felt so happy that it freaks me out to remember it. It was like someone had just given me the best drug ever invented, or never invented, he says. I didn't think about my parents or my life. There was no fear or any negative emotion at all. I felt so good. I thought, this feels so good. I am so happy. And then it just keeps going on from there. And it's really fun to listen to this because there's lots of near-death experiences for people who are older, who are our age. But to be able to listen to this kid telling about this, and so many of us have these kids that are about that age that have this kind of thing happen. And you can just imagine the interaction that they're having as well. But anyway, I also just think that this book is so useful because of the fact that you are a quantum economist. You and Dr. Pim Van Lommel, as well as Gregory Sushon, PhD, sum up each of the chapters and explain. So you go through all different aspects of the near-death experience. And maybe you could just tell us what the most common themes that exist for near-death experiences that you've noted in the research that you've done.
Well, I guess you could say there's roughly 10 kind of different, segments within a near-death experience. I have never seen one where they've had every single one of these experiences within, the framework of their NDE. That's not common. But I would say the most common ones would be well, the initial out of body experience. And as you were describing what that boy's experience was, you hear that, that's very, very, very common. Now, it's nice to hear it in his voice because it's just the language that he's using is really interesting. But you'll hear that no matter what the age, no matter what the gender, religion, race, etc. And the reason I really like that part of it is it really is the most, concrete proof that these are real because what you'll hear about is, for example, with Pim Van Lommel, he was a cardiologist and he was practicing right around the same time as Raymond Moody. And he was starting to have, bringing his patients back to life. I mean, they were just starting to use these resuscitation techniques. And he started to have some of his patients tell him, here's what happened to me. And, like anybody else, he's like, well, okay, whatever, So I don't think he was what are you going to say? If you hadn't had the experience and you really never even heard about it, you're not going to, you're going to be like, all right, we'll medicate this person. Obviously, they're still having issues. But then he started hearing it more frequently. And, he's like, this something's happening here. And it's happening when his patients have gone into cardiac arrest. And so they're completely out. You can't form memories in that state. You have no brain activity. And in a lot of these cases, they're able to tell him what happened in the room when they lost consciousness. And they'll describe it from the same vantage point as that boy did. they'll never describe it from the side, they're standing and looking over the shoulder. It's always above and looking down. And when they recount what they saw, they'll tell the doctor, well, you were standing there, and then he came over and dropped whatever, a scalpel or whatever. And this person then walked in, they had green shoes on, which I thought was interesting. And there's no way that, these people are not only gone, but they're facing the ceiling, and generally their eyes are covered. And they came in a lot of cases, they came in unconscious. So they never could have known what was happening. So that to me is, that's really, really interesting. And Pim Van Lommel goes into it. And what I like about his book is really my favorite book on the subject. So if anybody really is interested in reading, and he really, what I like about his book is not, he had, as a cardiologist, he was one of the first guys to really, see this. And he wrote an excellent book, and right around the same time as Raymond Moody did. What I really like about his is he brings in a lot of concepts from quantum physics. And when you start to look at, a way to, articulate what a near-death experience is, so much of it, you can look at things like in quantum physics, like non-local consciousness and block time, and these kinds of things that are really describing exactly what people are experiencing, and they're also things that we're just learning are real. I mean, this is what's really happening. In a lot of cases, it's very hard to wrap your head around it. One of the things they talk about, most everyone talks about, is that they experience past, present, and future as one. Now, I have tried, and maybe I have a lot of time on my hands, but I've tried to experience that, and I cannot wrap my head around it. And, in quantum physics, we talk about block time. Everything was predetermined from the moment of the Big Bang, and we're just passing through time. And so these things all can happen at once. So Pim Van Lommel gets into a lot of these things, and one of them in particular is what he calls non-local consciousness, a consciousness outside of our bodies, and now how they've proven these types of things. So I got a little off track. I get excited because when I start talking about the quantum physics, I'm not articulate in the subject. And I feel like the more you look into it, the more you realize you can't wrap your head around so many of these things. But at a certain level, if somebody really breaks it down and spells some of these things out intelligibly for someone like me, you're like, this is what they're talking about in the near-death experience. So, the out-of-body experience is the first thing that's experienced. A very large percent of them experience it first. And then a lot of people then from there move into the next stage, which would be generally into the tunnel experience. But sometimes they'll move right into this other realm, and that gets really interesting. And so I'm not sure where you want me to go from there, but because I can talk about these all day long. So, you just tell me where you want me to go, and I'll do the best I can.
There's so much to talk about, but one of the things that this young man said that I wanted to just make clear to everyone, and I'd love just to hear your opinion on this, is that almost everyone who talks about these near-death experiences, they're leaving their families. This young man has his parents who he thinks, oh gosh, they might miss me, but it doesn't bother him because he knows that they're going to be okay, and he knows that he's going to see them again someday soon. Because again, there's that time-space continuum, which is different from what we're experiencing. And in fact, a lot of these near-death experiences go on for days or sometimes weeks, but they happen in the blink of an eye in terms of what's happening here on Earth. Is that correct?
Yeah, I mean, you'll hear about, a full-blown NDE happening within 1 minute. Other people might have been out for 10 minutes, 15 minutes. I mean, there's some really extreme examples, but there are, quite a few of them. So in that sense, that's where you get into that, what is time, from a quantum, vantage point. Um, but yeah, it's, and to your point where you talk about, they don't feel bad because they know that they'll see them soon. What you'll often hear them say is, people don't realize that we're here such a brief, moment. And from where they're sitting, it's so brief that it's almost like they're going to see you tomorrow. And so they're not in any way sad. Um, what does happen when they come back, oftentimes they don't, well, most of the time, quite frankly, they don't want to come back. Some are given a choice to stay, and the ones that come back obviously made that choice. But most are told that you have to come back. It's not your time. You have more to do. And that also, kind of dovetails into what you get a sense of, that this is school, and we're here to learn how to love and to learn. And so, you got to go back. You have more to do. You have a lot more to learn. But for those that have crossed over and are literally looking back and seeing loved ones, they're like, I'm going to see you, like it's going to be like that. So they're not sad. When they do come back, there are a lot of people that feel guilty because they'll often not tell their spouse, for example, that they didn't want to come back because they feel a little guilty about that. So it's very, very interesting. I guess it's a good sign on both sides of the both realms.
Yes, and I think that what you touched on there, talking about the fact that they learn that it's all about love, that this journey is all about love. Obviously, we're in school here and we have a lot to learn, but um, when people come back, they aren't nearly as interested in material things, but they also, I don't know, 85% of near-death experiencers change profession and go into something that they are earning less money, but that they are feeling that they're helping more people. Is that correct?
Yeah, I don't have the statistic in front of me. It's a very high number. You'll also see a lot of them move out of relationships, whether it was, boyfriend, girlfriend, or even married. So they're pretty major life changes, and that's very, very common. And a different profession is probably the most common. And what's interesting is that, certain things like, I mean, obviously the fear of death is completely gone. Now, I don't know how you measure that other than taking somebody's word, but I mean, again, this is where watching a testimonials as opposed to reading a book is really important, because you can really see, what's in their eyes and in their inflection. You can see that that's really what they feel. And, as someone living in the West, where we're terrified of, death for the most part, to hear that is interesting. It's kind of, it's nice to hear. I think, studying it for as long as I did, it definitely changed my feeling or relationship with death. I think when I was studying, the Tibetan Book of the Dead, I think I was really terrified of death when I was a lot younger. And, so that's kind of why, you tell yourself, well, I'm studying in Buddhism, the death of the ego and so on and so forth. But really for us, the death of the ego is essentially, especially in the West, like dying, you're just completely losing yourself. The way that these people describe it is, is really it's, I don't want to say convincing. It's not like they're trying to convince. They don't, it's not that they don't care either. It's just, this is what it is. And you should, you just get this incredible sense of strength when you hear these people speak. If you have lost someone, um I don't even know how to describe it. I guess you would probably all understand, when you experience something like reading, or again, watching the testimonials. it can really change your perspective. And, unfortunately, you wish a lot more people would really look at this subject, that haven't had, a near-death experience or haven't had someone pass. But because I think if you get deeply enough into it, it can really kind of change the way you might look at the world at large. And but as you said, sometimes people that I know, they think I'm nuts anyway. So it's kind of par for the course because of the kinds of things I'm interested in. But trying to talk to them about this is really uncomfortable for them and strange for me. And so it's really hard for me to go down that road. But I think that we'd all be a little better off if we looked a little bit differently at death in general. And, especially in the West, I would say we could all benefit from that.
Yes, I believe that as well. And I also just want to say that it's interesting to me that you say that having a near-death experience, which is true, can make you not fear death. I think that having a child transition is exactly the same thing. None of us on here fears death because we're going to be with our kids. So that is something that we can't wait for. And again, different mediums such as George Anderson has said, that it will be like a blink of an eye, and like we haven't missed a single thing when we see each other again. One of the things that I find fascinating in this book, and going back to Dr. Pim Van Lommel, I just want to say that he does talk about, it's interesting to hear him as a skeptic too, talking about these different near-death experiences and trying to rationalize them, but also catalog them. And one of the things that I found the most fascinating about these near-death experiences that people are, they're going over and experiencing, is that they immediately get an enormous download of information. They also see halls of learning with golden books that actually are soul's plans of different people here on earth, but also other books to learn. There's just so much learning, and it's a download that just happens almost automatically. But for almost everyone who comes back, that download has disappeared. Is that true from your research, that
Yeah.
once we're back here, we don't have that download
Completely, like almost, 100% that you hear that. I mean, they may have intuition, that, they may bring back some kind of connection to energies or, spirit or people. But in terms of, literal specific knowledge that they describe that they did have, how the universe works, they understand everything, absolutely everything, that is gone. It's just completely gone. And oftentimes they say, as they're coming back, almost as in reverse, it's just kind of coming out of them. And they'll try to remember. They'll try and, one woman was telling her husband, write this down. And she was saying all these things. And he says, you don't make any sense. I don't know what you're saying. And by the time, she tried to keep going, he couldn't write it down, and then it was gone. So that's extremely common, very, very common. One of the things that I was really trying to do in this book is, because I had read so many of the books, and I was very interested in, because I am always looking for, when I do research for, say, my programs, I look for very, very, like, the needle in the haystack. I have to look at what is really going on here, maybe that nobody else sees. I mean, that's how I've had to train myself for the markets, because you can't be doing what everybody else is doing. Otherwise, you're on the same side of it doesn't work that way. So that's the way my mind works. And what I started seeing were things that I had not been reading or hearing in talks by people that had near-death experiences, people writing books about them. There were a handful of things that were not being talked about that I found not only extremely interesting, and in some cases, at first glance, not something you necessarily want to hear. But to me, they gave much more credence to the fact that these were real. And so I do bring that up often in the book. It's really sometimes what you don't see in an NDE that tells you as much as what you do see. And I think in terms of these being real, that's kind of what I was able to pull out with a handful of things that I really hadn't heard anybody articulate. So and I could get into a couple of those.
Question that I was asking you at the very beginning. Thank you for coming first full circle. That's perfect. Yes. So this is something, I mean, that's something that I noticed about the book, was that you were telling what the things that weren't present, that were present in other near-death experiences, that really proved to you that these were things that were happening to people, that they were actually real.
Okay. I'll give you the first one. And what I'll say is that, again, you know, I studied thousands of these, so there will be some outliers. But I'm describing what is essentially just consistent all the way through, because you kind of have to throw some of the outliers away. I will say also that I had some standards for the NDEs that I included in the book. One is that they had to have had cardiac arrest. That's essentially the closest you can come. I mean, you're dead, you know. So this, you know, and it had to either be in a hospital setting, or there had to have been somebody that was trained in, you know, could corroborate that it was a cardiac arrest. And then age-wise, it had to be above a certain age, because, you know, little kids, I think they have the most interesting ones, but oftentimes they'll get kind of translated through the parents, and by the time, you know, we get them, they may not be quite there. So there were a whole bunch of other things that screeners, I guess, that I put in there. It was just what I did, and it in no way invalidates anybody's experience. It's just, so the first thing that shocked me, before I tell you what it is, I'll say I believe it resolves well. But what is rarely seen is that a person will see a spouse. And you know, a lot of these people that have a near-death experience are older, a lot of it because of cardiac arrest. And, you know, I'm reading these things and I'm watching these things, and how come nobody's saying I mean, I would think that would be the first thing that somebody would see. A lot of these people had a spouse predeceased them. Why is no one seeing this and talking about it? Again, you will hear this sometimes, but I'm saying over thousands of these things. And I find the ones that are written through questionnaires especially important, because these are people that they're not getting published. They're not out there talking, you know, they have no skin in the game. They have no reason not to, you know, lay out exactly what they're seeing. So to me, you know, if no one is saying something that you would expect to be one of the most important things, is I crossed over and I saw my spouse, and it was just phenomenal. It almost never, ever happened. And the reason I feel that's important is that that's not what people would want to do. And if there are thousands of these things, and they're all essentially saying, by not saying, that what you would think that they would want more than anything they didn't see, to me, you wouldn't be saying what you're not saying unless it were true, if that makes sense. So, and I'll quickly say that my feeling is that they all talk about kind of being part of this almost soul tribe that they kind of have these experiences, which is why, yes, you'll see your kids and family again. And I think what happens is, when everyone is told it's not your time, you have to go back, very often it'll be, you can't cross this bridge. You can't go into that field. It's always something, in my opinion, that you could look at that as metaphor in the good sense. I mean, you have to expect, when you're in this other realm, how do you put this together so that you can understand it? And so maybe it's a bridge, maybe it's a tunnel, whatever it might be. But that bridge is going somewhere, and they say you can't go back if you cross it. So there's something else clearly on that other side, and it's much more significant because once you're there, you're not coming back. So, and this is just a wild guess, but I believe that that's where you would see it. But nobody describes that. And I found that fascinating. And I think because, who wants to hear that in one sense? But to me, in a strange sense, I really liked hearing that, because then I'm like, then this can't be not true, because people wouldn't be saying this. They would be. That's the first thing. I saw my husband, he looked great. Now, the other interesting thing is, in the same vein, is people, extremely common to see a grandparent, to see an uncle, to see a neighbor. So why not a spouse? But so you are seeing people that you have recognized. Oftentimes they're not the age that you recognize them. So you might see your grandmother, but she's 30 years old. 30 years old is the most common age. But they may appear at that age. Whatever age they are, they say they look incredibly vibrant. They're not their age. So I don't know why that is, but that is what's happening. And so here's the other thing that I find really interesting is that we have dreams, and in dreams, we probably see people that are alive at least as much as that have passed. I know that I do. Um, and so, you often hear, well, it's, these people are having dreams, or, this is, they talk a lot about, well, you have DMT in your brain, and when you die, some of it gets released, and that's the experience that you're having. And I can say, as someone who has worked with psychedelics, so I have experience with DMT. Again, that's not quite the way it works. Similar to dreams, you see you see mostly people that are alive. You will see people that have passed. In all cases, it's not as vivid. When they say it's more real than real, it's not like that in the DMT state, and it's not like that in dreaming. Maybe in lucid dreaming, you'll get closer to that. But what's interesting is, in a near-death experience, they never see someone who is alive ever. And once in a while you'll hear, I saw this person, but then they found out that that person had already died and they didn't know about it. So, I mean, in dreams, that doesn't happen. So when people start saying, well, they're dreaming, it's just some release of the brain, it's like, again, statistically, that is incredibly significant, statistically speaking, that you're hearing thousands of these, and there's never anyone that's alive, ever. That's kind of strange. You don't see your wife ever. That's kind of strange. And when I say ever, I'm talking, if I read 4,000 of them, maybe, I don't even know if I saw 5 of them. Another thing that we probably don't want to hear, but again, it's something that makes me feel like, is you rarely ever hear of someone seeing a pet or animals of any kind. It's not common. You'll hear someone like, what's his doctor? You had mentioned him earlier when we were speaking.
Uh,
What's
Dr.
um,
Let's see.
I forget his name. His is a very, very elaborate.
Are you Jeffrey Olson, or no? Are you
Um,
or Eben Alexander?
yes, yes.
Oh, okay, sorry.
Yeah, his is probably the most elaborate ND I've ever heard, and he talks about music and seeing animals and all these kinds of things. That is very, very uncommon. You don't hear people talk about music. Um, People don't touch things. When they're in the tunnel, I mean, the first thing I would do is I'd be like grabbing everything. Like, what's this thing made of? I mean, that's kind of the way that I am. And people don't touch things. They're not curious in that way. They experience things. So their experience of, unconditional love is just, they can't contain it. They see colors that that we can't even imagine. So there's certain ways that they experience things that are much, much more intense, and they see things that we don't see here. But some of the obvious things, when you hear that they're moving, they rarely speak about feeling, their weight. And some of them say that they don't have a body, others do have a body. But when they're moving, it's more of that they're moving with their conscience more than with their bodies. You get that sense when you hear these over and over. It's not like, oh, I took a walk up the hill and I was exhausted. That doesn't happen. There isn't that kind of motion. People are moving, but it feels more like through thought. And of course, you never hear them speaking. They're communicating telepathically, which is really interesting. You don't hear, the person was yelling and singing out loud. It's like, no, that doesn't exist. And so these are things that became blaringly obvious to me, but I hadn't heard them. And I believe part of it is, well, I'm not really comfortable that these things aren't there. So I'm not going to bring it up. We didn't see them, so I'm not going to talk about them. But I believe that these things resolve and we do see them, but no one sees them before they do that final crossover, and none of them do that. They all come back. So I feel like that does happen, but nobody really talks about that. And I think that's kind of a loss, because I think it takes away some of what I feel makes these things clearly more valid and believable.
And it is. I mean, obviously, we know that our loved ones, the ones that we really want to see, are over there, and our pets are over there as well. And I do remember in the book several times where a grandfather was at the end of a bridge, and he would say, "No, you can't come any further. You're going back now," which is so fascinating. We have two questions in the chat box that are kind of similar, and I think that this would be such a great thing for people to understand a little bit more about you and Sean. Let's see, Hilda's saying, "Hi Elizabeth, can we ask DJ how this knowledge has helped him with healing from the passing of his son?" And Galen, kind of same thing. Can you describe how understanding NDEs and all that they entail helped you process and grow from your son's passing? So maybe you could let us know, and we have maybe time for one more question after that, but just tell us about how this has helped you on your journey.
Sure. I was really, I mean, as we all were, in really bad shape, and I basically couldn't get out of bed, and and I'm talking for months. And once I got a hold of that book and started watching these testimonials, uh, it just hit me. I'm like, something's going on. And there's that part of me that's like, yeah, I don't want to be like, I want this to be real, and I'm kidding myself because my son Sean is not here now. It was way deeper than that. And it just, I don't know, it just somehow it pulled me out of this darkness. And I think once it lit a fire inside of me and inspired me to really learn more, and in my way know that, okay, I've got to either make a film or write a book. That's when, if it was real, I would figure it out for me. I would know what's really real. And that's always happened with every film that I've done. And so the deeper in I got to it, the more I couldn't I just couldn't punch holes in the concept, which of course, it's not just that it's comforting, which obviously it was comforting, but it's like it opens this whole other world of possibility, like something really much bigger than we realize is happening here. And I've always been interested in, religion, world's religions, but like the real deal. And like religio is linking back to the source. And, in some way, I felt like that I was having that kind of experience. And, and I think because I have also somewhat of an analytical mind, when I started to marry some of these things with quantum physics, where it's like, hey, I mean, Western science is way ahead of, of what we think, but they, really, those kind of thinkers aren't necessarily going to apply that to, say, the near-death experience. And it's like, you really got to try and look at some of these, say, through the prism of quantum physics and vice versa. And then you're like, then the light bulb really goes off. And I don't know, it just made the whole process made me feel just incredibly kind of excited about what's really going on. I don't think I would have had this experience. I don't think I would have come back to this subject were it not for what happened to my son. So for that, I'm like, it was a gift in that sense. And, I every once in a while, I don't do it a lot because, but every once in a while, I'll read some of the reviews on Amazon, and there's, hundreds of them now. And when I read them, it's like, I mean, I did this more for myself to learn, but as I'm going, I mean, I'm like, I do want other people to see this because this is really, pretty cool. And so every once in a while I'll read them. And when I hear somebody say, my son passed and, this really pulled me out of whatever, and I really, whatever, it's just, it really is like, man, I don't know, it just channels a lot of, grief and all those kinds of things into something really, healing for not just for me, but hopefully for other people, just as, your group is doing, and the kinds of things that you're wrestling with here, the real stuff. And I think so it's helped me feel more connected, I think.
It's definitely healing. And I just want to show the cover of the book. When I was talking about Dr. Pim van Lommel, one of the things that I really liked in the book too is that he related the fact that knowing having this knowledge could actually save the earth, because when we realize that we're not just here to use up everything that we can while we're here, even though we have grandchildren and great-grandchildren as well, sometimes we don't think about it. But when we realize that we're going back and that everything that we do here is important. Everything that we're learning here is important. And we want to be able to go back and show everyone there that we got it, we understood it. I think that being able to have books like this help us to live better lives while we're here. And it's interesting because I believe it's Tricia said here, that perhaps if people saw the loved ones they love most, as well as their animals, they would refuse to come back. That's a possibility.
Right. Yeah. I really have no doubt that it does happen once that final crossing is made where they can't come back. But I think because of the way I've seen it, it makes me much more convinced that they're real, because people wouldn't not say those kinds of things. So yeah, it's pretty incredible what's going on. And as far as Pim van Lommel goes, I highly recommend anyone to read his book that I, of course, can't remember the name of now. I have a horrific memory in certain things, that being one of them. But his first book, and he does have that section where it talks about quantum physics, but it's in layman's terms, so you'll kind of get a sense of it. And you can also watch him on YouTube. There's some older interviews that he did that are really, really interesting. And I also, if I have a website dedicated to the near-death experience, and on it, there are a lot of resources. So there's links to all, like his book and a lot of books and a lot of other books that I thought were really, powerful. And there's also links to videos, and I have them broken out for testimonials, for research. And there are also links to, very reputable research reports, some peer-reviewed reports and research like that. But especially his book.
Consciousness Beyond Life, is that correct, Dr. Pim van
Yes.
Lommel? So we have it in the chat box in case people are interested in reading something that is easier to understand in layman's terms. We also have, let's see, Gayla is saying, I finished a book recently, Biocentrism by Robert Lanza, MD. Fascinating information about the quantum weirdness surrounding time, past, present, and future, and entanglement in such layperson read in a readable way. So
Yeah, quantum entanglement is really, really interesting. And again, you'll hear echoes of that in when people describe a near-death experience. And that also gets into non-local consciousness. But the quantum entanglement is very, very interesting. So they also sound very cool. So when you can bring that up in a conversation somewhere, you just have to hope that somebody doesn't know more than you about that, because you'll look pretty stupid. But it really, really is very interesting. And I don't understand 98% of it, but the 2% that you might get will really blow your mind. And then you start looking at some of these other concepts that these people are talking about in their near-death experience. You're like, well, that's quantum physics. We've got the formulas. We don't totally get why, but we do get that. Yeah, it is.
well, it's really wonderful that you've written this book and that it's available on Amazon and that so many people love it. It's a bestseller. It's exciting that so many people are informing themselves about these near-death experiences. But also, I just want to show this cover, if I can, with my strange screen here, of Rumi for Kids. It is absolutely beautiful, and oh, I can't do that. But it's got some obviously incredible poetry, but also beautiful, oh, sorry, paintings as well inside. So both of these I highly recommend. Maybe you can come back and talk about your psychedelic experience as well. That would be really fun. But we are running out of time. We always ask, did you have any closing words that you wanted to say, DJ?
I don't. I just no, I thank you for having me. I wish, to be honest, I had kind of come across a group like yours. I pretty much isolated, which was not a good thing. And I think I would have really benefited, by participating. I think I didn't think I wouldn't be able to get through 5 minutes of one of these, in a group setting. So I think I avoided it, but I think, what you've all put together there, and creating community and sharing a kind of experience that unless you've been through it, it's hard to really connect with people and describe it and talk about it and be comfortable with it. So my hat's off to you and everybody in your group. And I wish I wish I had stumbled on it earlier.
Well, I just want to tell you that we have a fabulous Helping Fathers Heal group, and they meet every Wednesday evening at from 7 to 8 Central Time, and they are so fun. They have so much fun together. They're actually coming out with a book at the end of the month, just of their own experiences moving forward in healing. But they're all great guys. So I have a lot of people asking how to contact you. Do you have an email or a website where people can contact you?
Sure. I'll give you the email that I use is it's info@project-shift.com.
Shift.com. Okay, let me just make sure that's right. Does that look right?
Oh, let me get my glasses. Yeah, that's it. That's it. And if you want access to some really good research, my the NDE site is it's nde-central.com. And that'll link you to some really great YouTube videos and YouTube research interviews and interviews actually with some quantum physicists, but relevant to the near-death experience. So I would definitely watch those. That I would take a look at.
Thank you. This has been wonderful. We always ask everybody to unmute and say thank you and good evening. So if you all would like to unmute, go ahead and do so.
Thank you.
Thank you so much.
Okay, thank you, Elizabeth.
Thank you, Lynn, for being on here. And thank you, DJ. And
Yeah, thank you.
Thank you, everyone.
interesting.
Thank you.
Thank you
Thank
so
you so much.
much.
Thank you.
Bye.
Have a wonderful evening.
Thank you.
Thanks so much.
Bye, everybody. Thank you again.
Bye, everyone.
Thanks for having